What happens when one of Britain's most beloved actors walks onto a morning talk show expecting a friendly chat and instead faces an ambush that turns into television chaos? In just 44 seconds, a simple question about his latest project would spiral into the most shocking on-air meltdown in daytime TV history, exposing a host's true colors and leaving everyone in the studio absolutely speechless. David Jason, the man millions grew up watching, the actor who brought joy to countless homes, sat down on that couch thinking this would be just another routine interview. He had done hundreds of these, thousands probably, but this morning was different. This morning, something was about to go terribly, horribly wrong. The studio lights were bright as always. The audience settled into their seats. Lorraine Kelly sat across from David, flanked by her regular panelists, Sarah Mitchell and James Crawford, both wearing those familiar morning television smiles. Everything looked normal. Everything looked fine. But underneath that polished surface, tension was already building. "So, David," Lorraine began, and there was something in her voice already, something sharp hiding behind that smile. "You are here to talk about your new documentary series." David nodded, genuinely excited about the project. "Yes, it is something I am really passionate about. We traveled all across the country, speaking to ordinary people about their extraordinary lives. The stories we found were just remarkable." "How lovely," Lorraine said, but her tone suggested she found it anything but lovely. "Though I have to say, some people might wonder why you are still working at your age. Surely you have made enough money by now?" The studio went quiet. Sarah Mitchell shifted uncomfortably in her seat. David's smile faltered for just a moment. "I am sorry," David said, clearly caught off guard. "Well," Lorraine continued, leaning back in her chair with an air of casual cruelty, "you must be what, pushing 80 now? Most people your age are enjoying retirement, spending time with grandchildren, that sort of thing. Instead, you are out here taking jobs that could go to younger talent." James Crawford jumped in, trying to redirect. "I think what Lorraine means is—" "I know exactly what I mean." "James," Lorraine cut him off, her eyes still locked on David. "I am simply asking an honest question. When is enough enough?" David took a breath, maintaining his composure in a way that showed decades of professionalism. "I work because I love what I do. Age has nothing to do with passion. I thought that was something people understood." "Passion," Lorraine repeated, almost mockingly. "Is that what we are calling it? Because from where I sit, it looks more like someone who cannot let go of the spotlight. Someone who needs the attention." Sarah tried again. "David, I think your documentary sounds wonderful. Can you tell us more about—" "Sarah, please," Lorraine interrupted, holding up a hand. "I am conducting this interview. David, let me ask you something else. Your recent work has been, how shall I put this, less than stellar according to critics. Do you ever worry that you are damaging your legacy by continuing to take on projects that are frankly beneath someone of your former stature?" The audience gasped. You could hear it ripple through the studio. David Jason, a man who had given so much to British television, who had brought laughter and joy to millions, was being attacked on live television by someone who was supposed to be celebrating his career. "Former stature?" David repeated slowly, and now you could hear the edge in his voice. "I was not aware my stature had diminished." "Well," Lorraine said with a shrug that oozed with condescension, "the numbers do not lie, do they? Your last series barely made a dent in the ratings. Social media was fairly brutal about it, if I recall. Perhaps it is time to accept that your time has passed." James Crawford looked absolutely mortified. "Lorraine, I really think we should—" "What, James?" "What should we do?" Lorraine snapped at her own panelist. "Should we sit here and pretend that everything David touches turns to gold? Should we blow smoke and tell him what he wants to hear? I thought we prided ourselves on honest conversations on this show." David's jaw tightened. He placed his hands on his knees, and you could see him making a decision in real time. Stay and endure this humiliation, or stand up for himself. Honest conversations, David said quietly, require mutual respect, something you seem to be lacking this morning. Oh, here we go, Lorraine said, rolling her eyes dramatically. The moment someone dares to ask you a challenging question, you play the victim card. How predictable. A challenging question? David's voice rose slightly. You have done nothing but insult me since I sat down. You have questioned my relevance, my talent, my reasons for working. You have dismissed my current project without even asking about it properly. This is not an interview, Lorraine. This is an attack. Sarah Mitchell nodded slightly, clearly agreeing, but too afraid to speak up against her host. The camera caught her expression, a mixture of sympathy and fear. Lorraine laughed, actually laughed. An attack? My goodness, you really are sensitive, are not you? I am simply doing my job, when asking the questions that viewers at home are thinking. Are they? David challenged. Or are you projecting your own issues onto me? Because I have to tell you, Lorraine, this says far more about you than it does about me. Excuse me? Lorraine's smile vanished completely now. What exactly are you implying? I am not implying anything, David said, his voice steady and clear. I am stating a fact. You invited me here under the pretense of discussing my documentary. But from the moment I sat down, you have made this about tearing me down. Why? What have I ever done to you? James Crawford tried once more to salvage the situation. Perhaps we can take a quick break and... No, Lorraine said firmly. No breaks. David, if you cannot handle a little scrutiny, perhaps you are right. Perhaps you should not be in the public eye anymore. The studio audience was completely silent now. This had gone beyond awkward. This was cruel. David stood up, slowly removing his microphone. I have been in this industry for more years than I care to count. I have worked with hundreds of presenters, thousands of crew members. I have done interviews in every format imaginable. And never, not once, have I been treated with such disrespect. Oh, please, Lorraine scoffed, still seated, still acting as if she held all the power. Do not be so dramatic. Dramatic? David's voice was incredulous. You just told me my career is over, and that I am damaging my own legacy, that I am too old to work, and I am being dramatic for objecting to that? Sarah finally found her voice. Lorraine, maybe we should... Sarah, not now. Lorraine snapped without even looking at her. David, sit down. You are making a scene. I am making a scene? David actually laughed at that, but it was not a happy sound. You have spent the last several minutes systematically trying to humiliate me on live television, and I am the one making a scene? I asked you legitimate questions, Lorraine insisted, but her voice had taken on a defensive edge now. If you cannot handle criticism would imply constructive feedback, David interrupted. What you have been doing is bullying, plain and simple, and I will not sit here and be your punching bag. The camera caught James Crawford mouthing something to someone off screen, probably a producer. This was spiraling out of control. And everyone knew it. Lorraine stood up now too, trying to regain control of her show. You know what, David? If you want to leave, then leave. But do not expect to come back here with your tail between your legs when your little documentary fails and you need publicity. The cruelty of that statement hung in the air. Even Sarah Mitchell looked shocked. David stared at Lorraine for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm but filled with disappointment. I feel sorry for you. Lorraine, I really do. Whatever is going on in your life that makes you feel the need to tear down others, I hope you figure it out. But I will not be part of it. Sorry for me? Lorraine's voice went up an octave. You are the one walking off my show like a child who did not get his way. No, David corrected her. I am leaving because I have enough self-respect not to sit here while you use me to make yourself feel important. There's a difference. James Crawford stood up too now. David, please, I am sure we can work this out. David turned to James, and his expression softened slightly. James, you seem like a decent person. I suggest you think carefully about who you choose to work with. Then he looked at Sarah. You too, Sarah. You both deserve better than this. Lorraine was practically vibrating with anger now. How dare you try to turn my own panelists against me? Who do you think you are? I am someone who knows their worth, David said simply, and I know I do not deserve this treatment. No one does. Get out then, Lorraine said, her voice shaking. Go on. Walk off. Show everyone what a prima donna you really are. I would rather be a prima donna with dignity, David replied, than a bully with a television show. That was the moment. That was when everyone in the studio, in the control room, watching at home, knew this had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. David started walking toward the exit. You could hear his footsteps on the studio floor because everything else was dead silent. This is incredibly unprofessional, Lorraine called after him, and the irony of that statement was not lost on anyone. David paused, turned back one last time. You want to talk about unprofessional? Look in a mirror, Lorraine. What you did here today was not journalism. It was not entertainment. It was cruelty disguised as conversation, and I want no part of it. Sarah Mitchell had tears in her eyes. Whether they were from embarrassment, sympathy, or fear for her own position, it was hard to tell. James Crawford looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and Lorraine Kelly stood there, trying to maintain her composure, trying to look like she was in control, but everyone could see it. Everyone could see that she knew she had gone too far. Well, Lorraine said, turning back to the camera with a forced smile, I suppose some people just cannot handle honest discussion. Sarah, James, shall we move on to our next segment? But Sarah was staring at the floor. James was looking anywhere but at Lorraine. The audience was completely silent. No applause. No reaction at all. David reached the studio door. A crew member opened it for him, and you could hear them whisper something like, I am so sorry, as he passed. David nodded, gave them a small, sad smile, and walked out. The door closed behind him. Lorraine tried to continue. So, coming up after the break, we have... But her voice wavered. For just a second, the mask slipped, and you could see something underneath. Uncertainty, maybe. Or perhaps the dawning realization of what she had just done. In the control room, producers were scrambling. On social media, which was already picking up the live feed, reactions were pouring in. But none of that mattered in that moment. What mattered was what had just happened in that studio. A beloved actor, a man who had given decades to his craft, had been ambushed and insulted on live television. And when he stood up for himself, when he refused to be treated that way, he was vilified for it. Sarah Mitchell finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. That was really uncalled for, Lorraine. Lorraine whipped around to face her. I am sorry. What did you just say? Sarah looked up, and there was something new in her eyes, something like courage. I said that was uncalled for. David Jason is a legend. He came here in good faith, and you were cruel to him. I was doing my job, Lorraine insisted, but her voice was defensive now. Your job is to interview guests, James Crawford added, and now he was speaking up too. Not to attack them, not to make them feel small. David was right. That was bullying. Lorraine looked between her two panelists, and you could see the panic starting to set in. You are both overreacting. It was a robust interview, nothing more. It was mean, Sarah said flatly. It was mean-spirited and unnecessary, and you know it. The studio audience, who had been silent this whole time, started murmuring. Agreement with Sarah. Support for David. Disapproval of what they had witnessed. Lorraine heard it. She heard the tide turning against her in real time. "We need to go to commercial," she said suddenly, looking off camera. "Now, we need to go to commercial right now." A producer's voice came through someone's earpiece, probably telling Lorraine they still had several minutes of show left. "I do not care," Lorraine said louder now. "Cut to commercial. Do it." The camera stayed on her face for just a moment longer. Long enough to capture the panic. Long enough to capture the realization. Long enough for everyone watching to see that Lorraine Kelly knew, absolutely knew, that she had made a terrible mistake. James Crawford removed his microphone. "I need some air," he said quietly, standing up and walking off the set. Sarah sat there for another moment, looking at Lorraine with something like pity. Then she stood too. "I cannot do this," she said. "I am sorry, but I cannot sit here and pretend that what just happened was okay." And just like that, Lorraine was alone on her own set. The host of the show, sitting by herself, with an audience that had turned against her and panelists who had walked away. Finally, mercifully, the show cut to commercial. But the damage was done. What happened in those few minutes was more than just a disagreement between a host and a guest. It was a masterclass in how not to treat people. It was a perfect example of what happens when someone mistakes a platform for power, when they confuse the ability to ask questions with the right to demean. David Jason had walked onto that set as a guest. He had walked off as the undisputed moral victor. He had not raised his voice beyond what was necessary. He had not thrown insults back. He had simply, calmly, refused to be treated poorly. And in doing so, he had shown more grace and professionalism than the person who was supposed to be hosting him. The studio crew, many of whom had worked in television for years, stood around in shock. One camera operator was overheard saying, "I have never seen anything like that in my life." A makeup artist who had prepared David before the show told a colleague, "He was so lovely when he came in, so kind to everyone. He did not deserve that." And they were right. He did not deserve it. Nobody would have deserved it. Back in the green room, before he left the building entirely, David sat for a moment collecting himself. A young production assistant knocked gently on the door. "Mr. Jason, I just wanted to say, what you did out there, standing up for yourself like that, it was really brave. And you were right. Everything you said was right." David looked up at this young person, probably just starting their career in television, and he smiled. A real smile this time. "Thank you. That means a lot. And let me tell you something. If you are going to work in this industry, never let anyone treat you the way she tried to treat me. Know your worth. Always know your worth." The production assistant nodded, clearly moved by the advice. David stood, gathered his things, and prepared to leave. As he walked through the corridor toward the exit, staff members stopped what they were doing. Some nodded at him respectfully. Others gave him encouraging smiles. One older crew member even gave him a subtle thumbs up. The message was clear. Everyone who worked on that show, everyone who had witnessed what happened, knew who was in the right and who was in the wrong. Outside the studio, David's car was waiting. His driver opened the door, took one look at David's face, and asked if he was all right. "I'm fine," David said, settling into the back seat. "Better than fine, actually. I stood up for myself. I refused to be someone's verbal punching bag. And you know what? It feels good. It feels right." The driver smiled. "Good for you, Mr. Jason. Good for you." As the car pulled away from the studio, David looked back at the building one last time. He thought about Lorraine Kelly, still inside, probably dealing with the fallout of her own behavior. He thought about Sarah and James, who had found their own courage to speak up. He thought about that young production assistant, just starting out. And he thought about all the people who had ever been in a situation like the one he had just experienced. People who had been belittled, talked down to, made to feel less than, and people who had wanted to stand up for themselves but felt they could not. He hoped that what happened today, as unpleasant as it was, might give someone else the courage to say enough, to say no, to walk away from situations and people who do not treat them with respect. Because that was the real story here. Not the drama, not the conflict, not even the fact that it was captured on live television. The real story was about dignity, about self-respect, about knowing when to walk away. David Jason had spent his entire career making people happy, making them laugh, bringing joy into their homes. And today, perhaps unintentionally, he had taught everyone watching a valuable lesson. You do not have to accept poor treatment. You do not have to sit there and take it. You do not have to smile and nod while someone tries to tear you down. You can stand up. You can speak your truth. You can walk away. And sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. So back in the studio, the commercial break was ending. Lorraine had composed herself somewhat, though anyone paying attention could see she was rattled. Sarah and James had returned to their seats, but the atmosphere was completely different now. When they came back on air, Lorraine did not mention what had happened. She tried to move forward, as if nothing unusual had occurred. But the audience knew. The viewers at home knew. And most importantly, everyone in that studio knew. The rest of the show limped along awkwardly. Sarah and James gave minimal responses. The audience was subdued. The energy that makes morning television work was completely gone. During the next commercial break, Lorraine tried to talk to her panelists. "Look, can we just get through the rest of the show?" she asked, and there was a pleading quality to her voice now. Sarah looked at her. "We will finish the show, but after today, I think we need to have a serious conversation about how guests are treated." "I agree," James added. Lorraine opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. What could she say? They had all seen what happened. Denying it or defending it would only make things worse. The final segment of the show was about cooking, of all things. A chef came on to demonstrate how to make a simple pasta dish. It was meant to be light, fun, easy. But even the chef could sense something was off. The usual banter was not there. The warmth was missing. When the show finally ended, when the cameras stopped rolling, Lorraine sat there for a moment. Staff began clearing the set around her. Sarah and James left without saying goodbye. The audience filed out, many of them whispering to each other about what they had witnessed. A producer approached Lorraine carefully. "We need to talk about what happened today." "Not now," Lorraine said. "Lorraine, this is serious." We have already had calls from—" "I said not now," Lorraine repeated, standing up abruptly. "I need some time." She walked off the set, leaving the producer standing there with a concerned expression. Meanwhile, David Jason was already home. He made himself a cup of tea, sat in his favorite chair, and tried to process what had happened. His phone was ringing constantly. His agent, his friends, colleagues from the industry, everyone wanted to know if he was okay. If he had really walked off Lorraine Kelly's show, what had been said? He let most of the calls go to voicemail. He needed quiet. He needed to think. What he kept coming back to was not anger. He was not angry at Lorraine. Not really. He was disappointed. Disappointed that someone would use their position that way. Disappointed that a simple interview about a project he cared about had turned into something so ugly. But he was also proud of himself. Proud that he had not let it continue. Proud that he had stood his ground. Proud that he had walked away with his dignity intact. His wife came into the room, sat down beside him, and took his hand. "I heard what happened," she said gently. "It was not pleasant," David admitted. "But you handled it well. You stood up for yourself. I am proud of you." David squeezed her hand. "Thank you. That means everything." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while. Outside, life went on. The world kept turning. But in that moment, in that quiet room, David Jason felt at peace with his decision. He had done the right thing, and sometimes that is all that matters. Back at the studio, the post-mortem was beginning. Producers were watching the footage back. Marketing people were monitoring social media. Legal was being consulted. Everyone was trying to figure out how to handle this situation, because it was not going away. This was not something that would be forgotten by tomorrow. This was significant. This was the kind of moment that people would remember and talk about for a long time. Sarah Mitchell sat in her dressing room, still in shock. She kept replaying the interview in her head. The look on David's face when Lorraine made that first cutting remark. The way his expression changed from friendly to confused, to hurt, to determined. The moment when he decided he had had enough. She felt guilty. Guilty that she had not spoken up sooner. Guilty that she had sat there for so long while a good man was being attacked. Yes, she had eventually said something, but was it enough? Should she have done more? James Crawford was having similar thoughts in his own dressing room. He had tried to intervene a few times, but Lorraine had shut him down each time. Should he have tried harder? Should he have been more forceful in his objections? These were questions they would both be asking themselves for a long time. In her office, Lorraine sat alone. The bravado was gone now. The confidence had evaporated. She was left with the uncomfortable truth of what she had done. She had let her ego get in the way of her professionalism. She had taken out some personal frustration on a guest who did not deserve it. She had crossed lines that should never be crossed. And now she had to live with the consequences. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she said wearily. It was the show's executive producer. He did not look happy. "We need to talk about what happened out there today," he said, closing the door behind him. Lorraine nodded. She knew this conversation was coming. She knew there would be consequences. How could there not be? "I know," she said quietly. "I know I messed up." "Messed up?" the producer repeated. "Lorraine, you verbally attacked one of the most beloved actors in the country on live television. He walked off your show. Your own panelists called you out on air. This is not a mess up. This is a crisis." Lorraine had no response to that. What could she say? He was right. The producer sat down across from her. "What were you thinking?" "I do not know," Lorraine admitted, and for the first time, her voice cracked. "I honestly do not know. I had some notes about being more confrontational, asking harder questions, and I took it too far." "You did not just take it too far," the producer said. "You were cruel." There is a difference between asking tough questions and being mean. What you did to David Jason was mean. Lorraine put her head in her hands. She knew he was right. She had been mean. There was no other word for it. The walls she had built up, the justifications she had been creating in her mind, all came crumbling down. And underneath it all was the simple, uncomfortable truth. She had treated another human being poorly, and she had done it on purpose. "I need to apologize to him," she said. "Yes, you do," the producer agreed. "But I am not sure that is going to be enough. This has already blown up online. People are angry. Really angry. They are calling for you to be fired. Sponsors are asking questions. This is not going to just go away." Lorraine knew that too. Deep down, she had known it from the moment David walked off that set. She had made a choice. A bad choice. And now she had to face the consequences of that choice. And those consequences would be significant. Because what happened on that show was not just a bad interview. It was not just a disagreement or a clash of personalities. It was a public demonstration of how not to treat people. It was a cautionary tale about what happens when ego and cruelty override professionalism and kindness. David Jason had walked off that set with his reputation not just intact, but enhanced. He had shown courage, dignity, and self-respect. He had proven that you do not have to be loud or aggressive to stand up for yourself. You just have to be firm and clear about what you will and will not accept. Lorraine Kelly, on the other hand, had damaged something that would be very difficult to repair. Trust, respect, the goodwill of the audience. Those things, once broken, are not easily fixed. As the sun began to set on that extraordinary day, two very different people were reflecting on the same event. David Jason, at peace with his decision, surrounded by love and support, and Lorraine Kelly, alone in her office, facing the reality of what she had done. The story of what happened in that studio would be told and retold. It would be analyzed and discussed. People would take sides, though the vast majority would side with David. Because in the end, it was not complicated. It was actually very simple. One person had been kind and professional and had stood up for themselves when they were treated poorly. The other had let their worst impulses control their behavior and had hurt someone in the process. And everyone watching had learned something important. How you treat people matters. Power does not give you the right to be cruel. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply walk away. David Jason had taught that lesson perfectly, without even meaning to. And it was a lesson that would resonate far beyond that one interview, that one show, that one day.